Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to Gen Z iOS Code. So in this video, I'll be going over a system design. So it is for one of my favorite apps called Income Ultra. So let me show you really quickly so you can see what it looks like. So basically, when you come into the app, you open it up, you see a welcome screen, right? You have the name of the app, you have the asset in the middle, and you have a get started button. So when you tap on that, you're gonna get transition into what the app is. Basically, the app is a salary calculator app. You're gonna see there's two tabs, salary and hourly. So we have some inputs on top and then we have some output below, right? So let's say for salary, you enter your gross, right? So let's say you get paid $76,000 a year. You see everything gets calculated for you. The hourly wage is based off of 40 hours a week. And then you have your gross pay, which is everything you get paid. And then take home, which is your net pay, basically what you get paid in your check, right? And then you can, by default, the take home is 83 and then you can change it. Then you can go to the hourly, and the hourly we go the opposite way. So we say, basically we say, let's say I work 30 hours a week, or now my hourly wage, yeah, let's say my hourly wage is 30 and I work 35 hours a week. Then everything will get calculated weekly, bi-weekly, for weekly, monthly, and yearly. And then you can play around with your take home. By default it's 83, but again, you can do anything. And then here in hours per week, let's say if you do more than 40, let's say you do 45, there's a new check, right? It checks overtime rate. Now the overtime rate, by default will get you time and a half, right? So let's say here you get paid 30, it will be $45 an hour. For the hours that are more than 40, so let's say from 0 to 40 is 30, from 40 to 45 will be $45 an hour. If you uncheck it, you see how everything changes a little bit, right? So it'll be a little bit lower. Right, so then you also have some settings, right? So in the settings, you have some nice description. You have a toggle, right, for dark and light mode. So let's say you can switch to dark mode and the app suddenly becomes in dark mode. So you can change that. And then you have some things here like developer version compatibility, basically some just small details and some agreements, right, as a general data. Right, so now that you can kind of know the app, let me show you what this looks like, right? Yeah, so now we're seeing, I took 3 screenshots so we can work with it. Usually, let's say you're in an interview, usually what you can get screenshots as well. A lot of times you get them. If not, sometimes what you will get is something like these, right? You will get like a frame, like something like these. And let's say you have here like a top, and then let's say you're doing like a Facebook app, right? So you will get, let's say for the post, you will get something like these. Let's see, and then you have all the posts, and then yeah, here you say post 1. So sometimes what you get is like mainly like a blueprint, right? Something like these, mostly looking like a drawing, right? But here, since we have the screenshots, we're just gonna work with them. That way you can see everything a little bit better, right? So I'm using this tool called ScholarDraw. So you can just go to scholardraw.com. It's free. You can just use it for like any of your things here. There's multiple apps and websites to do this, so you can choose the one you like the most. All right, so there's several parts into doing these, right? Especially for an iOS app or for an iOS interview. So usually the most common ones are functional and non-functional requirements. So we have to go through, several parts in order to complete these. So you don't get like, usually, especially when you're applying for like medium level developer or senior developer, you're not just expected to like code, like, whenever you have a task to do something, you have to kind of like help with the design of things, right? And how you make things, because you need to be able to create apps that can scale and create features that can scale, right? So here's when you can explain more or less how you know. And in an interview, this is one of the most important ones, because it can really give them really high level of like what is it that you know and how well you know it, right? So the steps usually we should take are these 4, right? You can have more or less depending on what you're going to do, but these 4 are like usually the most important ones. These 4, you cannot miss them at all, right? So you have first step, functional and non-functional requirements. So functional and non-functional are really, you should take about 5 minutes, right, in order to do this. Functional requirements is basically the requirements for your app, right? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Like right here, We need to calculate income based on salary. We need to calculate income based on hourly. We need to be able to change between light and dark mode. We need to be able to calculate overtime, things like that. And non-functional are things that you need, but are a little bit more behind the scenes and optimization and things like that, right? Let's say we need to persist light and dark mode, right? Because when the user closes the app and opens the app again, right, you need to be able to see, if the user saves it in dark mode, you need to be able to open it in dark mode again, right? So another thing, it needs to be easy to test, right? So your app needs to be very easy to test. You can do things like, for example, dependency injection and things like that. So you can talk about those things really briefly, right? If we're just talking about some of the requirements for the app. So it needs to be optimal. Maybe if you're doing some API requests, maybe you need to do some pagination and things like that. So now for data models. So data models, basically they're more like the domain of the app, right? So anything you will need, like here, you will need some type of input, you will need some type of output. So things like that, I'll go more into detail right now. But yeah, you definitely need data models every time. Now, API. So now this one is really important. So whenever we're making API calls to any endpoint, to literally anything, so you need to talk about those APIs, right? We need to talk about what you're using. You need to talk about if you have, let's say you're for a Facebook app, right? You have posts. You need to talk about all the endpoints and how you will handle all the endpoints. And also the optimization too, right? So let's say you're making a call, right, to get all the posts on Facebook, but you're not going to get 1,000 posts, right? You're not going to get an infinite amount of posts. So you need to talk about what you would do there. Usually pagination, you would use pagination. Let's say you get maybe 20 posts, and then when the user scrolls and get past the 17, then you get 20 more, and things like that, right? So you need to talk about all of that in the step 3 API. And then system design, finally, this is where you do the diagram, right? And then you kind of show your interaction. So this is a really important step because you can show your entire interaction and how you create things on the app and how you make basically the whole flow within the app. Right, so let's get to actually writing all of these, right? So for functional requirements, what do we need for functional requirements? So yeah, here basically, the user needs to be able to calculate income, right? Given salary, and then in here, given an hourly wage and hours per week, right? Now in salary mode, since we're just given the yearly gross, we need to be able to calculate this hourly wage. So all of those you need to mention, right? Things like that. So the app needs to calculate both take home and gross pay, because we need to calculate both. Gross pay is really important because that's what you actually make, but take home pay is really important because that's what you get in the check, right? That's what you can use towards your purchase, your home, your rent, everything, right? So let me actually put it down here. So I already have the headers for the section. So let me put them down here and I'll explain it to you right now. Right, there we go. To kind of save time, I just put it right here and then I'll explain it to you. I think there's no purpose of just typing it all out, right? Let's see. Right, so yeah, the user needs to be able to calculate income given salary, right? So we talked about that. Also given hours and rate. Yeah, of course. So given hours and rate, that's the one for hourly, and then the other one is the one for salary, right? So in salary mode, we need to calculate hourly wage. Yep, totally understandable. So app needs to calculate both take home and gross pay. Yeah, we talked about that too. We have optionally user needs to enter a take home percentage for a better estimate of take home pay. Now here, yeah, you can see this is optionally, but we still have it because that's a feature that we're going to include in our app, right? For hourly, make sure to take overtime into account and give users the option to uncheck. Right? That's because in hourly, yeah, if you go for more than 40 hours, we're going to have a check. Remember that check that we showed? So basically in hourly, we're going to have that check where, if you're doing more than 40 hours, that check is going to appear. And then by default it's checked, but you also want to give them the option to uncheck. Right? So we want to do that as well. User needs an option in app to change light to dark mode. Right? So we talked about that. User is going to see all the app info at the settings tab, right? So see here, you need to ask as many questions as you want, right? So try to keep it short, right? Maybe 10 minutes, up to 10 minutes, depending on the amount of time you have, right? If you have an hour or an hour and a half, I spend about 5 to 10 minutes, right? And yeah, basically what you need to do is basically ask all the questions and then write down all the requirements that you need to do for that. Keep in mind, let's say you're doing a Facebook app, you're not expected to do an entire Facebook app, maybe a couple of screens. So the requirements would only be, you only need to talk about those 2 screens that you're asked to do, right? You don't need to do things that you might be able to ask, right? Oh, do I need to do comments? Do I need to implement comments? Do I need to do, the share functionality or things like that, right? And then whatever you need to do that's what you need to talk about, right? Not the entire app. All right, so let's talk about non-functional. So yeah, need to persist light and dark mode states, need to be easy to test, needs to be performant, needs to update output in real time, present a nice welcome screen, right? So these are things that you need to know, you need to do. This present a nice welcome screen could also actually go into functional requirements. So there's definitely things that you can kind of this could be here or here. But yeah, as you talk about it, you can kind of place them, that one, let's say it could be in any other two, right? Now let's talk about data models. So what do we need, right? So let me actually copy these here so that you can see the screenshot as we do it. So yeah, you can kind of see that we need some sort of, let's say for salary, we need some sort of input. And we need some sort of output. Now you see the output looks the same, right? We have weekly, bi-weekly, for weekly, monthly, and yearly. For both, the only thing that changes is the take-home pay or the gross pay, right? Basically the title. And we have some salary input stuff and some hourly input stuff, so they're different. Hourly asks for these and salary asks for these. There's only one in common, which is take-home. So those are the things we kind of need to put in here. So let me actually copy all of those and put them right here. All right, so that's what we actually need, right? So you see we have salary input. So you don't need, usually here, you don't need to talk about, you don't need to put LEDs or bars or things like that, right? Like we do, let's say in iOS. Because here you're not writing code, right? You're just saying what you need. So you need a salary input. And for that salary input, we're going to have these 2 things, right? Yearly gross and take home percentage. And what are those? Oh, they need to be double. Oh, they're optional. No, they're not optional. Things like that, right? That's why you don't need the LEDs, you need inits, you don't need anything like that, right? Usually you just talk about them. If you're asked to do something or if you're asked to clarify something, you can add it, you can put it. But essentially all you need is just basically the plain data models that you're going to be using. And not every single, little data model. Basically all you need is just the main ones, right? Like a salary input, you can see clearly we need that. A salary output, so you can see salary output is hourly wage, take home pay, and a gross pay. So hourly wage, you see hourly, we only have those 2, take home and gross pay. But for salary, we have also the hourly wage. Now the hourly wage is a double, but you see the take home pay and gross pay, they're of type pay. That's really important. Try to make everything, try to decouple everything and reuse everything you see that can be reusable. Here we're creating a type pay and we're saying income type, we have an income type that could be gross and a take home. Now here you can mention, oh, this could be an enum, right? This could be an enum. We can have 2, gross and take home. So that's basically the income type. And then we have weekly, bi-weekly, for weekly, monthly, and yearly. And that's what conforms what we call a pay. And that pay, we use it in salary and we also use it in hourly, right? Right. And then, yeah, we didn't go over these, but it's pretty much the same thing, right? Hourly input, we need hourly wage, hours per week, take home percentage. And we need the overtime, right? Because if it's more than 40 hours, this could be true, right? So we need an overtime bool. And then we're going to have this user default keys, which is basically how we're going to store, how we're going to persist the dark mode state, right? So we're just going to be using this from SwiftUI, right? We're going to be using this natively to store light and dark mode. And by the way, guys, these app, I have it in I have the source code and I have the course. So there's going to be more information down below, right, in the description. So if you want to download the source code, I'm going to put the link down there. And I also, if you want to go more in deep and system design. And this system design, or if you want to go more in deep into how to make this app, I created a course in which I explain step by step and system design and code how I create this app from beginning to end so you can master iOS, and I'll leave the course down below too. So yeah, follow for that. All right, so let's go ahead and continue with the system design. We can put this one right here so we can see it. So now for system design, so you see now that we skipped the API. So API is really important, right? You should not skip it. The only reason why we're skipping it is because in this app, we don't use any API, right? So basically in this app, we're not making any calls. We're not calling any endpoints. We don't have a server, so we're not making calls to a server to know basically anything. So you always have to keep that in mind, right? So let's say you're making a Facebook app. Of course, you need to make an API call because you need to get all the posts, you need to get the comments, you need to get the amount of likes, things like that. In this app, it's all locally, right? You're doing everything on your phone on the client side. So we're not really using the third step API. That's why we're skipping it. But I put it in here for you to know, because if you're using any app that's, let's say, a weather app, yeah, you're using one of the maybe like Open Weather API or any other API. So you should need to be using some sort of API. Then you will put it in the third step, right? All right. So let's go ahead and continue. So in system design, this is really important. This is where you can see the whole flow of the app. So yeah, what I usually do, you can click in here or just type in the number 2, let's say, to like draw the shapes. So basically you're gonna do a shape for like each. Let's say here we're doing iOS, right? We're using SwiftUI. So we're gonna have a view called app starting view, right? App starting view. So in here's where you need to explain, basically create all these views, right? We're gonna be using model view model. So basically you need to explain here, yeah, I'm using SwiftUI, I'm using model view model. Why I'm using it, I'm using it because it's very simple. You can decouple a lot of things using it. And then we're gonna be using model view model, but we're gonna have another layer called store, where we're gonna be, I'll explain it in a minute, but that's like a coordinator that'll help us coordinate everything, right? So that's what we're gonna be doing. Let's come right here, and let's say, so app starting view, and we're going to have a welcome screen, of course. So a welcome view, let's call it view, welcome view right here. And then in SwiftUI, we're gonna have something called home tab view. So home tab view right here, and then the error is number 5, so we can just drag an error right here. And I'm just drawing this so you can see how to make those. Right. There we go. Yeah, I think this bar is better if I just go one by one. Right, there we go. So we're gonna have something when you go into the app, we're gonna have a view in SwiftUI called app starting view. So app starting view, it's gonna be in charge of either showing the welcome view or just showing the app, right? The actual app. So yeah, when we start, of course, we go to welcome view. So the initial value will be welcome view. So here I'm explaining more or less the flow, right? How we're gonna be doing things. And then, yeah, when the user taps on, I think the button's called start or something like that, we're gonna actually switch from the welcome view to the home tab view. So a variable, a boolean will change or the mode of the app will change from welcome to the actual app, right? So we're gonna change to these, and you see this home tab view. Why we have that? Well, because we have a tab view, right? And this tab bar has 2 values, right? Income and settings, and we can switch between them. If we have income, we basically showing the main section of the app. If we have settings, we're showing the settings of the app, right? So that's what we're going to have here, right? When I have two things right here, this one will be called income view, and this one will be called settings view. And let's do the errors. Right. Right, so this home tab view will be in charge of either showing income view or settings view, right? We can show either of the two. So now, actually, let's draw this one right here to say we're using model view model. So let's do that. Model view model right here. Right. So for the income view, we're gonna have a lot of logic on it, right? So we don't want to have, so we want our views to only be presentation. So we want our views to only have the components we need to show on the screen, right? We don't want any logic in there. So for each view, we're gonna have, for each one of these views, we're gonna have a view model, right? So we're gonna say income view model, and we're gonna copy this one, and we're gonna say settings view model, right? So let's put this one right here as well. And then of course the view will reach out to the view model for its logic, right? So, and here a little bit more of the same, right? So when you're doing income view model and settings view model, we only want the view model to contain presentation logic, right? So any logic that has to do with the view, that's strictly related to the view, right? So let's say, oh, whether do I show a certain component, what goes in those components, things like that we want to have in the view model. But we don't want to have, let's say, this whole calculation of how these gets calculated, that whole logic, we don't want to have it in the view model, right? Because that thing could even be reused in somewhere else. So we don't want to reuse any view models. We don't want to like have that, that logic tied to the view model. The view model should only show presentation logic for the view, right? So this is where the extra layer from the model view model comes out, right? So we're gonna have something called store, right? So let's actually create it right here. So we're gonna call it income. Let's see, income stored. And this view model is gonna reach out to the store. And actually, let me create another store that we're also going to have. So we're gonna have app info store right here. And this will reach out. I'll explain this in a second. And then this will reach out to this one too, right? Right. So, like I said, view models, we don't want to reuse them, right? We want to, we want to have, for reusability, we want to have services, stores, things like these, right? So in here, we're going to be using something I call store. So this is going to be a place where we're going to have every single piece of logic where we actually have all the functionality to calculate our take home and to calculate our gross pay. So any piece of logic that we're doing here, right? So the income view model basically, so the income view says, hey, what value should I show here? It reaches out to the income view model. Now the income view model doesn't know. The income view model will reach out to the store to look for that value. Now the store will do all the calculation. So the income view model doesn't know where the store gets the calculation. It only knows it has to reach out to the store. Now the store is the one in charge of reaching out to anybody or not reaching out to anyone. And, the store is the one in charge of getting that calculation done and, passing the result into the view model. So then the view model can tell the view, hey, this is the value, show it, right? So this is what we're trying to do with the store. And then same thing here, settings view model. So the view model will have basically presentation logic to the view, to the settings view, but we're going to have something called app info store, and that's going to be for the main information of the app. So let's say the name of the app. So we don't want to just type income ultra every time we need to use the name, right? Because then if we want to change the name, we have to change it everywhere. So basically in the app info store, which we can import that into like every single, if we need it here, we need it there, we can import that app info store. Basically we're going to have all the main information, right? Like the app name, app developer, basically everything here we show in settings. That's why we need it from income because we use the app name, and we need it from settings because all this information, we're actually getting it from the app info store. So it's going to live in the app info store. So we import it in settings and then we actually use it, right? So now one thing that's very important, right? So how do we use it? How do we reuse the app info store, and how could we reuse the income store and all these things, right? So in order to make it like very, very testable, you see we have one point here that says need to be easy to test. We're going to be doing dependency injection, right? So let's actually put it right here, dependency injection, right? So that's one of the most important topics, especially nowadays in Swift and in iOS development in general. So dependency injection makes things a lot easier when it comes to testing, right? So let's say in SwiftUI we can use a framework called factory. So it makes things really easy. You can type in, let's say, Swift factory iOS or something like that, like GitHub, right? And it'll show you can import it into your project and then you can use it. They have a really nice documentation you can read on. So basically, dependency injection, what we're doing is we're basically initializing. So we're not initializing the app info store, let's say in the settings view model, right? We're not doing that, right? Because if we do that, when we're gonna test the settings view model, we cannot swap or change the app info store. So what we're doing is we're gonna have it in the initializer, right? In the initializer, we're gonna create an initializer and we're gonna pass it in, we're gonna inject it. So by default, we can have, let's say, this one, right? Which is the one we're gonna use live. But then if we have it in the initializer, then you can swap out the store at testing or doing something else, right? And then you can have different stores. So let's say this app info store, we could have an app info store protocol, right? And that protocol is the type of the one we're gonna pass in into the settings view model, right? And then basically what you can do is by default, you can have this one, let's say app info store, or you can call it app info live store, which is, let's say, the one we use in production. But then while testing, you can use a mock store or a slow network store, or even in previews, right? You can use something like that. So let's say if you're making API calls, you don't have to make the you don't have to make the API calls for previews, right? And the same thing for for income store. And then what something like factory can help out, right? As when you have all these things and all the initializers, there's a lot of, once you have a bunch of stores, right? And you can do the same thing with the view models. There's going to be a lot of boilerplate code. So it can help out a lot if you use something like factory, because it basically gets rid of all these boilerplate code, right? So you register the store you want to use, and then you can re-register another store at any point in time, right? So let's say for testing, you can re-register it. And then that way you don't have to worry about like putting it in the inits and all that. If not, you have to create one at the very beginning and pass it in, right? Through the entire app, right? You have to pass it in through basically every single view, because you need it in the view model. You need to pass it in order to create a view model, right? If not, it'll just create one by default, basically. But then while testing, you can swap it out and you can pass in a different one, right? You can create your own and then pass in a different one, right? So this is a really important part of the whole system design. This whole thing that we did here is front end, basically on the client side. So we don't have any server side anything right now. Usually what I do, let me just put this below here. Let me delete this screenshot right here. Let's say you have some system design. You can have something here that says client side. Client side. Right. System design. Yeah. Client side. So let's say we're doing this client side, and then maybe, let's say you have a line here. I'm just showing you how to do it in case you had a server. And maybe you can have something here like server side, right? Server side. And then of course, if you had anything on the server that you want to communicate, you will have it here. And then the same thing, you would draw errors at, if you had a REST API, let's say, you can just have something like these and say, this is a REST API. And then let's say this income store had to go to the REST API, and you would do something like these, right? And then maybe back you get a JSON response. So you do something like that. And then maybe you can double click here and say JSON response. And stuff like that, right? You can play around with these. In case, if you have an app that has any API calls. But I'll be doing more videos, and I'll probably cover stuff that has API calls as well, right? For this example, we're not using that. Again, if you want to go a little bit deeper, I have some links down below to the source code and also to a really good course that I made. Yeah, you can just get it down below, right? Right. So I think I went over everything, right? Let me see if we're kind of covering everything we did here. Need to persist light and dark mode, needs to be easy to test, needs to be performance. So Part of doing all of these is like you need to decouple every single piece of data, every single piece of functionality that you have in your app. You need to try to decouple it, right? Not try to do everything in one view. Like, technically you can go and do everything in one view. Just create an income calculator view and maybe a view model and do everything in there. Try to, always decouple your logic and decouple your things and to make it like really nice and clean, right? And then this whole flow kind of helps you. Like if you do this before creating your own app, like this will help you a lot to kind of like understand the big picture and why you're doing it and how you're doing things. And it'll help you optimize things even before you write a single line of code. And that's what interviews look for too, right? If you're doing an interview, you're doing a system design interview, this is what they look for, right? So yeah, I think that'll be it for today. Stay tuned for any updates. Remember to check out anything I have in the description, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.